They are one of the best kept secrets of World War II. A classified unit who duped the Nazis numerous times and helped win the Second World War. Not with guns, but with their wit, pens, and paintbrushes. They are the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, also known as the Ghost Army. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops is a unique unit whose specialty is tactical deception. A troop of artists, musicians, craftsmen, and writers, the Ghost Army journeyed through the war in what they call traveling shows. They were to give theatrical performances, with both the Germans and fellow Allied troops as their audience. And war-torn France is their stage. Their props and tools, handmade inflatable tanks, fake radio transmissions, fake scripts, pretenses, and the usage of speakers recording sounds of troops assembling and tanks moving. A casting call for his actors was made. Recruited from the New York and the Philadelphia art schools and ad agencies, some notable men in the Ghost Army were future luminaries in the industries of fashion, arts, and cinema. Colonel Harry L. Reeder, the Ghost Army's producer, originally recruited 57 men from different roles. And by the time they reached France, they had grown to 82 officers and 1,023 enlisted men. The Ghost Army had 21 major performances, and we will be featuring 5 of them. Operations Elephant, Brittany, Brest, Bettembourg, and then skipping to Viersen. It was almost a month since D-Day. The Allied forces maintained their foothold in Normandy. The Ghost Army's first act is Operation Elephant. Their mission, to turn themselves into a fake division in order to cover the movements of the real 2nd Armored Division. It commenced from July 1 to 4, 1944. The real Armored Division was to move from a reserved position to a line near the Allied armies. July 1. The 2nd Armored slowly began to move out of the 4th, and the 23rd scrambled into action, replacing real vehicles for inflatable ones. As the 2nd Armored transferred each of its units, radio deceptions were also used for potential listening German intelligence. Although they made decent preparations, sonic deceptions did not yet arrive at this time. They covered for the Armored 2nd Division for 2 days. All was well until the moving 2nd Armored Division's artillery began firing, and its infantry was deployed just 4 miles away. It was assumed the 2nd Armored was identified by the enemy. Their debut performance did not go so well. Their audience, both enemies and allies, were unconvinced. It is assumed little good was done with the deception. They had not acted like the actual 2nd Armor's individual and vehicular activities convincingly. Also, they recognized they had not attempted to duplicate bumper markings, CP signs, and shoulder patches. They also learned to closely coordinate with their theater producers, high officers leading the big picture to avoid delays, misunderstandings, and incomplete information. Another factor for the failure, though not of their own fault, was the lack of German reconnaissance plane that could have potentially made the deception successful. On July 3, another American unit, the 3rd Armored Division, came to the fake 2nd Armored Division, so the Ghost Army could disappear the next day. Their next mission was Operation Brittany and was considered as one of the most geographical operations in their mission. It was a month since the Allied invasion of Normandy. General George S. Patton's Third Army had pushed west after Avranches was taken by the 8th U.S. Corps, while General Bernard Montgomery's 21st Army Group pushed southeast along with the U.S. First Army. Near Avranches is the German front line, where the 7th Army is holding their line. The Allied forces needed to win against the 7th Army in order for the Battle of Normandy to close decisively and with finality. The plan was to surround the German army, the British army from above, while the 3rd Army's division diverted to several towns, and then Argentan, and then crush it. But there was one problem. The Germans could notice the plan and withdraw before an envelopment is completed. The Ghost Army's mission? To stop the withdrawal of the German 7th Army by deception. Integrated with their respective divisions, they plan to detach west, while the real divisions keep going for an envelopment. If the Germans sees this, they would think the US 3rd Army are dispatching regiments for Brittany and had no plans for an envelopment, thereby would not consider a withdrawal as an option. The 23rd Unit was divided into 4 groups to simulate a column of combat teams from 4 different divisions. The deception was going to be done mostly with radio and special effects. They thoroughly prepared and rehearsed their acts once more, and by August 7, the 23rd special effects and fake signs were exceptionally elaborated. Everything was set for the August 9 operation, when suddenly an unforeseen event transpired. The German army, instead of retreating, started pushing forward for a Mortain counterattack. Hitler made a gamble and ordered to pierce through the US 1st and 3rd Armies at Mortain and regain the Avranches region, thereby would choke the Allied Normandy invasion and isolate Patton's 3rd Army. For the 23rd Special Troops, the show must go on. Operation Brittany, an operation to deceive the Germans, has turned into an operation to confuse them. The US Corps made its heroic and bloody stand against the German 7th Army at Mortain. German echelons now hyper-focused on the region. As the 3 US infantry divisions were thrusting east, their combat regiments were detected detaching westwards. The 35th near Mortain and Dole, the 80th near the 90th near Laval, then west, while the 2nd Armored Division moved south, passing the Avranches. From the German perspective, the sudden movements were confusing. It fogged the actual German estimation of the event. Finally, the US Army and Montgomery's 21st Army closed the gap, thereby enveloping and destroying their enemies. While the 23rd troops made a successful execution, they do not claim responsibility with the Nazi 7th German Army's fall. At the very least, their acts impacted the enemies in some ways, causing bewilderment. Despite such, the 23rd's visual display of the operation was so convincing that it confused personnel from the real divisions and got mixed up with the fake ones. They duped the civilians and even the rest of the US Army. The fake division's intent of going west led them to their next mission. Brest was a heavily fortified locale led by Nazi General Bernhard Ramke. Before Brest, the Allied noted that the Germans had been easy and even ready to surrender, and they reasoned that if the US Army showed their might, perhaps the Germans in Brest would surrender after being shelled a couple of times. So the 23rd's next theater show was Operation Brest, commenced on August 20 to 27, 1944. Their mission? To enlarge the 8th Corps Infantry Division, which in turn are tasked of capturing the fortress. adding 2 tank battalions for the 6th Armored Division, and replacing flash canisters, one of the 2nd Infantry Division Field Artillery Battalion. They were artillery shell casings filled with black powder used to mimic the glare of an artillery battalion firing. The 23rd Unit was divided into 3 deception task forces: the supposed 15th Tank Battalion, 57th Tank Battalion, and the 69th Tank Battalion. August 25th, the deception was considerable. The dummies, spoof radios, special effects, and sonic were ready. As they slowly positioned themselves miles from Brest, the Germans took notice of it. The nights of August 23 to 24, 5 sonic half-tracks were utilized by each supposed tank battalions. On August 25th, they activated the projected tank noises, which sounded like they're approaching, harboring, and withdrawing. It was an auditory spectacle that even Allied troops a mile away were truly convinced that tanks were assembling nearby. The presentation was perhaps too convincing to the Germans as well, especially on the supposed 15th Tank Battalion, that they installed 20 to 50 more anti-tank guns pointed to where it was positioned. And as the fake 15th Tank Battalion later dispersed, a real combat division of the 709th Tank Battalion moved perhaps unwittingly to where the Ghost Army was positioned. Unfortunately, the real combat division was blitzed, with the Germans drawn by the deception. The rest of the 8th Corps finally barraged Brest and was met with fierce resistance. They had misjudged their enemy's determination. Ramke fought for 27 days before surrendering. Colonel Cyrus H. Searcy commented on the 23rd's performance after the operation as having limited apparent results, but at no fault of the 23rd Unit. There was lack of aerial reconnaissance. Ramke's determination was not factored in, but Colonel Searcy also noted the deception works of the 23rd was complete, thorough, and correct to the tiny detail. He believes the Ghost Army is still valuable to the US Army. During the real division's storming in Brest, the 23rd moved east into France, near Laval and Le Mans. They temporarily settled at a neat and abundant countryside untouched by war. With the streak of operations from the Ghost Army, a failed start, another debatable contribution, and an accidental mishap with limited results, one would wonder if some of the troops had second thoughts of their unit's capabilities. There were perhaps lingering doubts from the actors on these so-called traveling shows, especially the stage directors, officers who heard the assessments. They traveled to Torres, a nearby town, to distract themselves from the bleakness, even for a small amount of time. Everyone in the town ate abundantly there. They feasted with superb cuisine. They also enjoyed the drinks. Bottles of Cointreau were obtained into stunning sidecar cocktail. And oh, the 23rd also liberated the town as well. They were there, so might as well liberate them, right? It was the only European town that was formally liberated by the Ghost Army. Perhaps these events gave the men of the Ghost Army some morale that they need to push forward for moments like this, and for the Army's own families. They need to even work harder on rehearsing if they were to win an operation. On August 25, the Ghost Army celebrated the liberation of Paris. There, they admired both architectures and the females. They described the Parisian girls as delightful dolls, admiring them as they whizzed by on their bikes with skirts billowing. The troops noted a contrast with the Norman farmer girls they encountered earlier. The 23rd tried to enjoy as much as they can, as their next mission was one of the riskiest defensive operations. After clearing up Brittany, Patton's Third Army raced through France and was set to capture Metz, a heavily fortified city. Patton pulled troops to help take Metz, while Montgomery's 21st Army Group pushed north for Antwerp, Belgium. These actions resulted in a 70-mile critical gap, with the 43rd Cavalry Squadron, a troop of only 800 men, covering 20 miles. If the Germans noticed this 70-mile gap, they effectively could march down unopposed and able to sandwich the Third Army. with Metz at the south, spelling certain doom to Patton's army. The Ghost Army's mission? Plug the gap in the 3rd Army's line and reinforce the 43rd Cavalry Squadron. In order for this to work, they need to pretend to be the 6th Armored Division to deter the enemies from positioning in the gap. Perhaps knowing they would simulate the 6th Armored harkened some of the troops back to their first mission, which debatably did not go well. From Paris, they drove for 250 miles and stopped near the locale of Bettembourg. Just being kilometers away from the front line made the men more apprehensive. The Ghost Army started relying less on fooling the German reconnaissance, as Allied Air Force was gaining air superiority over France. So they set up 23 inflatable tanks and relied heavily on special effects, radio, and sonic deception, especially the last one as the Germans were across the Moselle River. Sounds of trucks roared through the night. In between, they were briefed by the 6th Armored Division for a supposed recreational leave, with a side mission to stage a misinformation campaign at a nearby town. The men of the 23rd Special Troops didn't always use inflatable tanks to deceive the enemies. They were sanctioned to pretend to be of higher rank that it even fooled their own allies. This time, senior Ghost Army members were going to pretend to be Allied generals as they were assigned to spend time at French cafes near the war's front. Their mission? To spread misinformation to listening spies. It is not surprising in times of war there are ears placed in public places such as bars, parks, and others. In this case was no different. Intelligence agents were planted at these stations pretending to be bar patrons while listening closely. Special effects were made for a convincing Superior's vehicle. Everything was prepared, and then action. An Allied military vehicle arrived at the bar. Then came out aides armed with machine guns guarding a uniformed Allied general. They talked to a bar owner and asked him to take his fine wines. The owner, nothing left to do, allowed the wines to be loaded up in their jeep. Livid over what happened, the owner would spill to the German spies what just transpired. Other soldiers were having too much fun. They visited another nearby village and have a good time and picking up girls. They would pretend to be drunk, spilling both beer and military intelligence, with informants sending informations to the Nazis. The troops even befriended villagers who would inform them of the potential German movements. However, their real mission was not yet over. The 23rd continued to simulate the 6th Armored Division for 2 days, until the 83rd Infantry Division could cover for them. However, the 83rd was delayed, so the deception extended for days. It was only a matter of time until something is going to start giving them away. They had to convincingly pretend to be tank technicians and personnel of the 6th Armored Division on an extended amount of time. As each day goes by, it became increasingly perilous and worse for the Ghost Army. They were in a vulnerable spot, and if the enemies caught a whiff of deception, they didn't have enough weapon to defend themselves. Another day passed by, and the Germans, who were in disarray throughout France, had started regrouping, becoming more fiercer. Around 20 German patrolmen were caught gathering information on the American line. The day after came, and civilians started reporting Germans crossing the nearby woods. Then, the signal company reported that their telephone lines were cut. One can assume what was going through the troops' mind in the middle of their pretend play. Was it going to be a botched operation like the rest? They never had an actual definitive win as a unit. General Patton himself was feeling the pressure, as evident to a letter to his wife. There is one rather bad spot in my line, but I don't think the Huns know it. By tomorrow, I will have it plugged. The 3rd Cavalry is holding it now by the grace of God and a lot of guts. Finally, the 23rd drew a huge sigh of relief as the 83rd Infantry arrived. The mission was a success. In this metaphorical stare down, the Germans blinked and believed in the Ghost Army's bluff. This was a turning point of the unit, so much so the US Army utilized their expertise in more operations. Until their final and most important mission, Operation Viersen. As though a plot in a movie, the Ghost Army's last mission was that of a final glorious charge to the enemy. A fitting one because after the operation, they were never heard from ever again. The plan was straightforward: pierce through Germany's defensive onslaught and invade the German heartland. For war students and aficionados, this event is known as the modern crossing of the Rhine, where the Allied forces invaded Germany and subsequently destroyed the main Axis power once and for all. Steep preparations and rehearsals were made. All their props and tools readied. It was their closing night, their gala performance. This mission was both intimidating and nerve-wracking for the actors themselves. They could not afford a misstep. The fate of the world is at stake. The final mission of the Ghost Army: inflate their numbers and merge with the two divisions of the 9th Army, which in turn is responsible for the invasion. From the two cities in Holland, they were to make their way towards the Rhine. They were to hold their ground despite a storm of shells raining on them until they were able to cross the river. Discreetly, the Allied armies positioned themselves far away from the river. The 23rd might have had apprehensions, as no matter how the operation goes, they would undoubtedly be barraged by Nazi Germany's full might. They prepared and provided hundreds of inflatable tanks. Unfortunately, the Germans already detected their whereabouts. They already had assumed an Allied invasion would take place, and they were figuring out when and where. The Allied presence near the Rhine River was a confirmation of that. German intelligence was in full gear, and they would not allow deceptions or diversionary tactics to fool them. They then intercepted communications of Allied divisions nearby. They studied the American Morse code operators' patterns, called the operator's fist, where each telegraph has this distinct accent. It's so unique that it's practically impossible to duplicate, and the Germans had studied and recognized the Allied operators, and there were no changes to their patterns of communication. As the Allied forces tried to cross the river, the Germans pulled troops from elsewhere and amassed both defenses and offenses to where the crossing would take place. Reports came of aircraft carriers already positioned on the river, and they also confirmed that there were no battalions nearby to surprise them. It was just the large 9th Army. First wave of German assault shook the silence. They were already found out. Determined, the two divisions stood their ground. German intelligence intercepting Allied communications confirmed they were not changing course. The Nazis ordered full defense of the area and obliteration to the nearby forces. The Allied forces remained in their position, never making any tactical retreat back. The Germans maintained their firing, when suddenly, around 20 miles north, as though out of nowhere, the real infantry divisions had already pierced through and invaded Germany. The Germans had pulled all their forces to one point that they unwittingly weakened the other borders. Questions must have been running in the enemy's minds like, how did the Allies dupe them? All of the movements, informations they intercepted were correct. The Ghost Army's real final mission? Pretend to be the 9th Army's 2 infantry divisions and stage a supposed invasion, diverting German resources to defend the spot, while the real infantries charged through the weakened area miles north. A ghost army of 1,100 was to pretend to be more than 30,000 soldiers, create 600 inflatable tanks to go side by side with the real ones, develop inflatable planes, artilleries, trucks, even massive aircraft carriers that were seen earlier, all built overnight. Not only they created these, they perfected them. From passable designs to actual looking dummies, they have truly polished their crafts. Capturing photos from above, it would look remarkably authentic. It even fooled the American pilots. All their sonic tricks and special effects were performed in full blast. Convincing sounds of pontoon boats and bridges being built, sounds of hammering and sawing roared through the night. But one of their greatest deception was communication. Their plan was to take over the Morse code operators to misdirect the Nazis. The 23rd employed their musicians, who were keen on rhythms, and they would sit next to the real operators, observing, learning, and practicing their distinct fists. What was practically impossible to do was flawlessly achieved by them. To maintain secrecy, no written orders were given to the Ghost Army. Troop coordination was maintained through radio and Morse code communications. The plan was, at some point at night, the real divisions would turn off all their communications and go dark, moving to the actual spot of the invasion, while the 23rd takes over the communications and dupe the German intelligence. Every tiny detail is carefully placed, and they actually had full scripts written for false troop coordination. All of these efforts led to the success of Operation Viersen, opening the doors to the fall of Nazi Germany. Their efforts actually saved tens of thousands of Allied lives. The Ghost Army suffered only 3 casualties. Historians call this their finest hours, their best final performance, an effort that earned the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops commendations. After their last major operation, the Ghost Army made one final act. At the thunderous applause from their audience, they took a bow and disappeared from existence. They remained unknown for decades, hidden behind top-secret documents, unsung heroes while other soldiers received medals of honor. Until 1996, when the documents of the 23rd was declassified. If their grandchildren were to ask about the war, some would only succinctly say they fought the Nazis. Their heroism recognized late, and most had become actual Ghost Army. Still, the legend of this creative band of soldiers who fooled the Nazis continued on, and were only beginning to tell their unique stories, tales of artists going to war.